Okay, I think we are ready to begin. Good morning, everyone. I am Janet Tulland. I'm president of Middle East Peace Now Board. Greetings to all of you, and thank you for registering to attend our Middle East Peace Now May Forum, featuring Abby Martin as our guest speaker. I'd like to first thank our co-host, Eastside Freedom Library, and co-sponsors Jewish Voice for Peace, Twin Cities, and Northfielders for Justice in Palestine and Israel, as well as all the local organizations, and not local, by the way, who spread the word about our monthly forums. Before we begin our forum, the board members of Middle East Peace Now want to acknowledge the ongoing violence taking place in Gaza, occupied Palestine, and Jerusalem. We stand in solidarity with Palestinians everywhere who decry the loss of life, homes, and businesses suffered almost exclusively by Palestinians. It's fitting today to also recognize the anniversary of the Nakba, when in 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were forced to flee from their homes and villages when Israel declared statehood. At 1 o'clock today, the Northfielders for Justice in Palestine and Israel will hold its annual recognition of this event via Zoom. Details are listed in our chat. There will also be an in-person march from 2 to 4 p.m. Central Time today, here in the Twin Cities, beginning at Philphila Restaurant in Northeast Minneapolis. Again, this is listed in the chat. And finally, many of you have requested updates on the COVID status in Palestine. We have included a link to Alice Rothschild's blog, which she updates weekly. You may remember that Alice spoke at Middle East Peace Now about 2 years ago. Abby Martin is an independent journalist and TV presenter living in Oakland, California, and I just found out she has a new 11-month-old baby. In February of 2020, Martin's booking to speak at a conference at Georgia Southern University on critical media literacy was canceled when she refused to sign a pledge to not boycott Israel as required by law in the state of Georgia. Martin, represented by the Council on American Islamic Relations, filed a free speech lawsuit against the state of Georgia. Abby, we welcome you.
Thank you so much for hosting me. Thank you, Middle East Peace Now, for this very important event and for your monthly forums. There's so much, of course, happening right now. As you mentioned, I just want to take a moment to just kind of take stock in the loss of life and the horrific violence that's unfolding throughout all of occupied Palestine. Over 125 killed in Gaza alone, orphanages, refugee camps bombed. I just saw footage of a sole survivor of the Al-Shati refugee camp, a small 2-month-old baby. I mourn as a parent for his loss, as well as all of the other children who have been robbed of a future. Of course, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is such an ancient holy site in Islam getting attacked by soldiers. And then there's the harrowing lynch mobs that are unfolding, committing violent ethnic cleansing and pogroms right before our eyes. You know, imagine if armed Muslims raided a synagogue during Passover and hospitalized hundreds of worshipers while chanting death to Jews. Or let's say, imagine an armed extremist mob of Trump supporters storming through an immigrant neighborhood in Texas, violently expelling immigrants from their homes and taking them over and occupying them. They would be major stories in the US, right? It almost just seems cartoonish the way that the US media runs cover for what is going on, especially when you flip the narrative and really replace Israel with any other entity or just envision, any other entity committing these crimes. They have been so successful, right, in creating this propaganda narrative of them being the victims and demonizing anyone who criticizes them, and they've shielded themselves. But I do want to start off this presentation just by saying that something has changed. Something has finally changed, at least in my eyes, watching all of this unfold, seeing not only the incredible resilience and resistance from Palestinians who are living in the face of sheer terror, as we're seeing across East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza, but I'm seeing things change here on the ground in the United States, which I think, according to Palestinians, this is what they need the movement to originate from, is American citizens pressuring our own government. I'm seeing more people pay attention now than ever have before. all across the internet, all across social media, waves of protests that have erupted, not only across the United States, but around the world. There's huge mass demonstrations going on actually today to cite the anniversary, of course, the 73rd anniversary of the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing that founded the state of Israel. This is incredible what we're seeing. I mean, people who were never into Palestine before, all of a sudden their interest is there. I think that this has kind of been boiling over since the last horrific bombardment of Gaza in 2014. And of course, the Great March of Return, the direct targeting of innocent women and disabled people and children, of course, during that, peacefully protesting. And we really haven't seen it come to the surface until now. We haven't really seen this mass consciousness come together. We've seen it here and there. We've seen people kind of renounce their allegiance to Israel, whether it be someone like Natalie Portman or other people like that, Seth Rogen, other famous celebrities who have kind of said, you know, I don't stand for this, that did during the 2014 war. But now I see average people who aren't even really plugged into politics suddenly ready. They're primed and they are ready to take in the information, and they finally can connect the dots. You know, Israel has known this sentiment is coming. Israel has known for quite a while that the consciousness has been changing for years. It's been bubbling under the surface, and that is why they are so desperate to maintain the narrative. They're so desperate to lock down and control the information, which they have for quite some time, right? I mean, we're talking about the advent of social media in the last decade plus that has really kind of flipped the script. And they know that, which is why they have started passing these anti-BDS laws. They did this a couple of years ago. They started passing these anti-BDS laws here in the United States, going around state to state, Israeli consulate measures, Israeli consulate members, as well as, of course, US politicians who they know are staunchly aligned with the state of Israel. This is kind of the unspoken thing in American politics, that you know exactly where your allegiance lies in order to stay in power and to have power in US politics. You can ask the same with American journalists. They know this is a third rail issue, and they know what not to touch in order to keep their job. So they knew that these would be relatively easy to pass. You know, true to their nature, they have shielded all criticism under the notion that Judaism is conflated with Zionism, of course. So if you criticize the state of Israel, you're an anti-Semite, you're a racist, you're a bigot. And that has been an effective tool for them. So they have utilized that argument and gone state to state, passing these anti-BDS laws, which essentially criminalize peaceful boycotts, peaceful activism, because they knew that there would be a mounting movement to pressure them. They saw what happened in South Africa. They saw what happened to Jim Crow here, these racist policies that actually fell due to pressure, due to boycotts, due to this constitutionally protected First Amendment right. They are scared that this sentiment will develop into a political movement that will eventually defund them. And they are only committing these war crimes in broad daylight. Just right before I got on this call, I saw that they had demolished a high-rise building housing Al Jazeera and AP media offices. It's absolutely abhorrent and shocking. And they are only doing this in broad daylight because they know they are shrouded with impunity from the United States. So these anti-BDS bills are quite prevalent here in the United States. I think if you were to kind of draw the average American off the street and tell them that 30 or so states have bills directly undermining and violating our First Amendment, pledging fealty to a foreign nation, and actually forcing Americans to forfeit their constitutional rights in order to work in such states, I think that a lot of people would be pretty shocked. I think that they would be pretty shocked. And, you know, before I get into why I decided to engage in litigation against this and how this all happened to me, I wanted to briefly just talk about how I became passionate about this issue, because it's so relevant to how and why I'm part of this lawsuit. And it all, of course, stems back to, you know, finding out about Palestine for the first time and the war crimes that are committed. And it ties, of course, back to this very day. Just yesterday or 2 days ago, IDF's forces bombed the Al-Sharok journalist tower This is another high-rise media building that houses several international media offices. Now, back in 2012, when I was working at Russia Today, they shelled the same El Sharok journalist tower, and they blew the leg off of an RT cameraman. One of my colleagues had to get his leg amputated because of the airstrike. I was horrified at the time. I couldn't believe that they would target press. I thought that this was just kind of an internationally understood war crime. And my network had asked for a statement from Israeli forces. They said, why did you do this? And the IDF spokesman at the time said, we obviously knew there were journalists in the building. Everything in Gaza is a Hamas target. They claim that there was Hamas satellites on the roof of the building. They always do that, but you would think that Israeli drones or surveillance technology would actually try to prove these outlandish lies to justify these war crimes, but they don't even care to do that. Then they said something quite startling. They said RT has taken a side in the coverage. I mean, this was not only an explicit admission of war crimes, but this was almost an open threat to the network that if you continue to cover this with a pro-Palestine lens, you're fair game. You're fair game to be targeted. Of course, all of this was solidified when I went to the West Bank myself and saw with my own eyes the atomization of the West Bank, the impossibility for a two-state solution, and the fact that Palestinians there live under this humiliating Israeli military law where it's illegal to even protest or hold a flag or convene in groups of 10 or more or pass out political literature. And of course, you can't be armed to protect yourself from the violent extremist settlers who want to kill you and expel you from your homes. I was banned from entering Gaza. I was told from Netanyahu's press minister that I was a propagandist. And moreover, I was an Iranian agent, which is a scary thing to be called when you're within that territory. So it all kind of culminated with me working with these 6 journalists from Gaza to film and document the Great March of Return, which turned into a feature-length documentary, Gaza Fights for Freedom, which really, above all, depicts the heroic resistance of Palestinians, but moreover, presents a clear-cut case of Israeli war crimes. And this is what we wanted the movie to be, a tool for the movement to show people the unabashed nature of Israel to commit these war crimes. And this is directly targeting protected categories of the Geneva Conventions, including children, press, disabled people, and medics, including, of course, the tragic story of Razan al-Najjar. Today's attacks, as I'm hearing from my colleagues on the ground in Gaza, are even more brazen than they were in 2014. This is saying a lot, considering 2,200 Palestinians died, 500 children within 3 weeks of bombing in 2014. And to hear from my colleagues now that the bombing is even more intense, more devastating, more indiscriminate, less warnings, it just makes you just take a pause and really ask yourself, how did the world let it get to this point? So, my film, which of course is available for free now on YouTube, on the Empire Files YouTube channel, it explicitly advocates BDS. It explicitly advocates boycott, divestment, sanctions. My political work for the last 10 years advocates boycott, divestment, sanctions. I am extremely passionate in the issues of social justice and anti-racism. So the advocacy of Palestinians is an extremely important, deeply held moral belief of mine. So back to this conference that I was supposed to give a talk, which leads me into this whole lawsuit. Back in 2019, I was invited to give a conference in February of 2020 at Georgia Southern University. It wasn't even a conference about Palestine. It was a conference about media literacy, which is quite ironic, considering that eventually I was censored from giving a talk about critical media literacy. So this conference was supposed to be held the next year, and I was very excited. I'd planned a lot of my life around going to this. I had kind of rerouted all of my schedules and figured out that, I was going to fly to Georgia and give this talk. Soon after I agreed and made plans to do so, I was sent a contract from the organizers of the conference. Within this contract laid a clause that alarmed me. And in fact, I recognized the language from, of course, my studies on anti-BDS legislation in the US. I never even connected the fact that I would be presented such a contract until I was given one myself. It said, you can never or have never boycott the state of Israel. And if you want to work as an independent contractor in the state of Georgia, you have to forfeit this right to boycott the state of Israel anytime now or in the future, or never have in the past. I was completely shocked. I was astounded that I was, again, being asked to basically give up my First Amendment. Not only the First Amendment right to free speech, which is our most sacred right that we have, our most sacred liberty that this country is allegedly founded on, but also the constitutionally protected right to boycott. This is a right that was granted to us. The Supreme Court folded the right to boycott into our First Amendment during the Montgomery bus boycotts and thereafter, because it was such a successful tool during the civil rights, Jim Crow, apartheid era in this country. And of course, we've seen the power of boycotts around the world to take down hostile governments, to take down just racist, systemic policies that are horrific and unjust. I was completely just floored that I was being asked to renounce my political beliefs in order to speak, in order to work in this state. Of course, I refused. How could I comply? The conference actually completely fell apart, and it ended up being canceled altogether. I remember looking at the website trying to figure out what was going on, because the organizers just never responded to me, and then the conference was canceled, and I was so confused. I just thought, no one's going to actually confirm how crazy this is and what recourse I have. And I remember looking at the website and it just said this conference is canceled until further notice. And I just felt completely hopeless. I felt totally disempowered. I didn't know any recourse that I had to hold not only Israel accountable, but I mean, my own government that was prohibiting me from doing these things. So I ended up just tweeting about it because I just didn't know what else to do. And I was immediately contacted by CARE, which is the Council on American Islamic Relations, an incredible organization that helps fight for the civil liberties of Muslim Americans, but they also do so much more around the country, really at the forefront of fighting free speech litigation when it comes to anti-BDS laws. And then I also partnered up with the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund, an incredible free speech advocacy organization based in DC. And we decided to sue the state. We decided to launch litigation against the state in March of 2020. So I went to Georgia, I filed this lawsuit, we had a big press conference, and basically press had no option but to pick up the story. But it still was not highlighted as much as it should be. Of course, I think that, as much as we hear about cancel culture here in the US, and as much as we hear about right-wing conservatives being censored and not being able to really speak freely, no one really kind of connects the dots that pro-Palestine speech is actually the most criminalized and policed in the entire country. And we're talking about state and government litigation being passed to suppress this speech. And that is very alarming. And that should be very alarming to every American citizen. Just days after I filed this lawsuit, Netanyahu's Ministry of Strategic Affairs tweeted a really alarming admission that they boasted that they had lobbied state legislatures to pass these laws. And in fact, his series of tweets seemed to respond directly to my lawsuit. It said, quote, "Whoever boycotts us will be boycotted. In recent years, we have promoted laws in most US states, which determine that strong action is to be taken against whoever tries to boycott Israel." And just kind of wrap your mind around that statement that you have a foreign government admitting direct foreign interference in our laws. I mean, we hear about Russian interference in our election and in our media. What about this? This is a foreign government that's actually saying that they worked hard to lobby state legislatures to change and subvert our First Amendment. I mean, that's crazy stuff, right? And also, moreover, you have a foreign nation threatening economic consequences to American citizens. and against American citizens' constitutional rights. I mean, it's completely outrageous that people have to choose between their First Amendment and their right to work. And as we know, I mean, this affects everyone who's an independent contractor, everyone. I mean, imagine a substitute teacher, someone who's working construction, everyone. I mean, I was slated to give a keynote speech at a university, and I was supposed to receive an honorarium of $1,000. But this applies to anyone who's receiving $1,000 working any job across the state of Georgia. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. I mean, back to the fact that boycotts are so fundamental to our civil liberties. I mean, just imagine if during the civil rights movement, the state of Alabama said you cannot work here if you're engaged in the Montgomery bus boycott. I mean, I understand that these laws have to be overturned. And that's why I decided to use my case as a vehicle. I mean, my voice is just merely a vehicle to push forward this lawsuit so we can not only, of course, shine a light on how absurd and ridiculous these laws are, but also just hopefully inspire other people that they can too challenge these laws. And in fact, they have to challenge these laws, because if we don't take these fights to the courts, they will continue to stand, and they will continue to create a mass chilling effect for people to say, oh, wow, I signed that contract. I don't know if I could boycott Israel. Oh, wow, I need to work. I need to make money. The economy is really hard right now. I guess I have to sign this contract. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. It's unjust, and it's unconstitutional, and it's flagrantly unconstitutional. And we need to take the power back in our own hands and say, no, this is not acceptable. And thankfully, other people have in other states. Judges in Kansas, Texas, Arizona, and now Arkansas have all deemed this law unconstitutional. The judges have fallen on the right side of history there. Unfortunately, other states have tried to change the law, which is exactly what Georgia is doing now. Georgia is trying to change the law to render my case moot. You have an Israeli state consulate official actually coming to the Georgia state legislature with politicians advocating to change the law so my case will no longer be relevant. They are trying to increase the amount that will trigger the law to $100,000. But what I say is there's no price tag that you can put on our First Amendment. There's no price tag that you can put on free speech. And so even if they successfully change this law, we will still be suing them on the grounds of our free speech violation. And we will still be pursuing litigation against the state of Georgia. A couple things that have happened that have been incredible updates with the case, as much as it has stalled during the COVID-19 pandemic. J Street, a Jewish organization on the Hill, and Trua, a rabbi organization, both organizations oppose BDS. They oppose the BDS movement, but they have filed amicus briefs to support my litigation because they know that this is a slippery slope. And if you violate the First Amendment, you're going too far. And they understand that BDS is peaceful, protected speech. And so to have these two Jewish organizations come on and file amicus briefs to support me, I think speaks volumes. I think, as should be clear to everyone today, of course, the liberal political establishment, as well as our corporate media that essentially acts as an arm of the Pentagon, they continue to pretend and continue to act under the facade that there is hope and feasibility for a two-state solution and some sort of peace process. We understand, I think, advocates for the Palestinian cause understand that that is not possible anymore. And that's why we have taken cues, especially white American allies of Palestinians have taken cues from the movement and understood that boycott, divestment, sanctions is the only way forward. And no, we're not talking about sanctioning Israelis and preventing food and medicine from getting in like Israelis prevent food and medicine from getting in the Gaza Strip. No, we're talking about isolating Israel politically, culturally, academically isolating this country, putting the pressure on its citizens. That's what has to happen. That's what has to happen. Even leftists that I've talked to within Israel agree with the occupation. I mean, think about this. I mean, 95% of Israelis are Zionist. Zionism is the notion of an exclusively Jewish supremacist state based on artificial majority. There's something called a demographic law in East Jerusalem that imposes a 70% artificial majority of Jews versus 30% Palestinians. What does that mean? That means that in order to maintain 70% Jewish population, you need to expel and ethnically cleanse Palestinians to maintain that. That's what Zionism is. That's what it always has been. It's becoming exposed, especially people who see the allegiance with the Trump administration and why is this fascist alliance so strong? And they couldn't excuse that away. But you still have this ridiculous notion parroted by our politicians, the Biden administration, the corporate media, that liberal Zionism is good, that you can be progressive except for Palestine, that the BDS movement calls for the abolishment of the state of Israel, that Hamas is calling for Jews to be wiped off the map. All of this is a lie. All of this is a lie. BDS simply calls for a democratic existence. It doesn't have to be called Israel, it can be called anything. But no, an exclusively Jewish supremacist state based on the ongoing ethnic cleansing and expulsion of the indigenous population does not have the right to exist. It does not have the right to exist to subjugate 5 million people in an undemocratic military rule. No, of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. And this is why BDS is the only way. BDS is the only way, and they are working. Boycotts are working. If they didn't work and if they weren't working, Israel would not have gone out of its way to criminalize this type of activism. Look at all the artists who have dropped out of plane in Israel in the last couple of years. Huge concerts and festivals have been canceled because they've dropped like flies because of pressure from their fans. Trade unionists across Europe striking in defense of Palestinians, people linking these struggles together, immigrants being caged at the border with Israeli military technology, Black Lives Matter, police being trained by Israeli military forces. All of these struggles connect. All of these struggles connect. The ongoing military spending to oppress and subjugate tens of millions of people around the world, the fact that we can't have healthcare here because we're subsidizing apartheid and genocide. People understand this and link this together, and they understand that they need to do something about it, that the burden falls on us. We are children of this empire, and we have the ability to organize and mobilize and link it together and create this mass wave of consciousness, which will turn into mass action. BDS, of course, is becoming so popular. Palestinian activists are feeling the brunt of censorship on social media and surveillance capitalism. And I think that now this issue is so ripe for a change. There's a seismic shift in the discourse that you can no longer be progressive except for Palestine. That is an untenable situation. That's an untenable situation. So as much as these politicians and corporate media outlets obfuscate the truth and both sides the issue and paint Palestinians as just subhuman who deserve this ongoing bloodletting, it doesn't matter because they are going to be obsolete. This does not work anymore. This does not work anymore. People can see the truth with their own eyes. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee the truth. You can't unsee the reality. They've deflected and they've projected this ethnic cleansing and colonization by smearing the people who are peace advocates, the people who are on the right side of history, the social justice warriors, the human rights advocates, the pro-Palestinian activists. But it's not working. And you can see this reflected in polling here. In Gallup's annual polling of Democratic Party voters on the views of the Israel-Palestine conflict, a majority, for the first time in history, says the US should apply more pressure on Israel than Palestine. That's a very significant shift because the media has made such a concerted effort to hide the truth, but people are finding out anyway. You have a sitting member of Congress, Rashida Tlaib. Her lived experience can't be denied. Ilhan Omar, another person who's been violently expelled from her country from US militarism from Somalia. She can't deny her experience. She's out there advocating for Palestinians. You have Betty McCollum, someone who introduces legislation to condition Israeli aid, finally garnering traction on the floor, getting co-sponsors, getting the word out. The dam is breaking. The dam is breaking, and the end is near. It cannot hold up for much longer. But Israel knows it's shrouded with impunity from the United States. You know, during the Iraq War, it was too controversial, actually, to put pro-Palestine text or literature or mix the messages of pro-Palestine with US out of Iraq. Can you imagine that? It was too controversial during the anti-war movement to link these together. Well, fast forward to today. You are not welcome in anti-war spaces if you are not pro-Palestine. That's how much the shift has become. That's how far we've gone. Look at someone like Bernie Sanders, the Jewish candidate for the Democratic primary field in the 2016 election and the last election. In 2014, he could barely muster a condemnation of the ongoing bombardment of Gaza from Israel. Fast forward 2 years later, the movement pushed him to actually say that he would condition Israeli military aid on the basis of international law. He actually posed the two-state solution to withdraw legal settlements to the 1967 borders. That's what the Hamas charter says today. The Hamas charter, as much as Israel wants to paint Hamas as this genocidal entity that wants to wipe Jews off the map, their charter actually denounces anti-Semitism as well as says that they would accept the two-state solution on the 1967 borders. That's how far the movement pushes people like Bernie Sanders. That's a testament to the success of the movement shifting mass consciousness in a profound, profound way. Israel continues to do these things. They continue to demolish high-rise apartment buildings, causing dozens of people to become homeless, kids, familyless, because they know they are shrouded with impunity from the US, and it comes back to this country, and it comes back to pressuring these politicians, to making Americans wake up that they are subsidizing this to the tune of $10 million a day, and to take the power back in our hands. And that starts with joining divestment movements here in the US, linking up with solidarity actions and groups like the movement today that has these protests nationwide. And most importantly, challenging the criminalization of our peaceful right to boycott Israel. We all must go and challenge these laws. I encourage you and I implore you, if you live in one of these 30 states, find out if anyone is affected by such a contract. And if they are, sue the state. Sue the state and challenge these laws, because you can and you will win. And that has to send shockwaves throughout the US political establishment that they cannot do this, and it will send shockwaves to the Israeli government that they cannot, how dare they try to subvert our constitution and our democracy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be a part of this forum.
Thank you so much, Abby, for everything said. And thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm just trying to confirm right now that, yes, we have a local organizer here that organizes around the anti-BDS laws here that was going to do a short announcement, and then we will go into Q&A.
Great.
This is a great follow-up to your talk, Abby. On Monday, May 24th, 7 p.m., there's a Zoom webinar, and it's titled, When a Minnesota Law Silences Us. The featured speaker will be Mira Shah, who's a senior staff attorney for Palestine Legal. As many of you know, two Minnesota laws passed in 2017 prohibit the legislature or any state agency from contracting with any business or vendor that supports BDS or discriminates against Israel. Similar laws in states across the US violate free speech rights protected by the First Amendment. Learn about the laws and the efforts in Minnesota to have them repealed. The link to register for this event on May 24th should be in the chat now. And I turn it back to Janet.
Actually, I think it'll be to Maya for
Yes.
Q&A.
Okay, to Maya.
And the link to registering is in the chat for May 24th, and also will be included in the follow-up email for this forum, along with resources that Abby has mentioned throughout her talk.
All right. Well, Abby, thank you for everything that was said and bringing awareness and your conviction. As someone who has their own Canary Mission profile and can't have their video open because of pseudonames and all the things that is happening that makes it hard to speak out for Palestine, I appreciate everything you do. Our first question is actually from Virgil. It says, are you aware of other state efforts to repeal anti-BDS laws? If so, can you describe what they are doing?
Yeah, let me get the list really quickly. Yeah, so there are a couple states that have heard challenges and they've actually ruled on the right side. So Kansas, Texas, Arizona, Arkansas have all deemed the law unconstitutional. So they have all been brought challenges. I think you may have heard about the speech pathologist in Texas who was given such a contract, and she successfully sued the state. This was a couple of years ago and brought down the law. And CARE has actually been working with plaintiffs in Arizona and I think the Arkansas case as well. And they have deemed it unconstitutional. So they have actually struck the law down completely and said that it cannot apply to anyone in the state anymore. There is one other state, and I don't want to get it wrong, but I know that there is one other state other than Georgia that is trying to change the law to keep it in place, which is exactly what Georgia is trying to do. And that is to change the cap similarly to what Georgia's doing. So making it where it only applies to people who are making $100,000 as an independent contractor. So then it just won't, so they don't have to actually strike the law down. It's kind of still a win for Israel. But I know that I'm not sure what's happening in that other state that they're trying to do that, but I know that in the case of Georgia, we're still going to fight, because even if that's successfully done, we still need to sue, because to me, I mean, it doesn't matter if it's $1,000, $500, $1. You cannot put a price tag on our cherished First Amendment rights. And to actually ask people to forfeit those rights on behalf of a foreign government and sign a loyalty pledge to a foreign government is completely unacceptable. And so we're not going to stop. And we are going to pursue litigation no matter what they do with this law until they fall on the right side of history, hopefully. And this could possibly mean that we'll get in front of a jury. And I feel like any jury, who hears what's going on, I mean, how could you possibly agree with this? It's completely appalling. So I do have faith in our fellow people, jury members, and also a judge who has been trained, you would hope, in how the Constitution works and what the First Amendment is. And so I do have hope and optimism that the law will be struck down in Georgia, and that hopefully it will just continue to propel other people to challenge these laws in their state, because they are continuing to get passed. And it is more states than not that have already done this. And that is a very, very alarming trend.
Thank you so much for explaining that. We have another question that is from a president asking about the update on your own case.
Yeah, so the last that I heard was when the Israeli consulate official came and tried to advocate to change the law. So this happened about 3 or 4 months ago. It has been completely stalled, and they just started reconvening because of COVID. So for almost a year, it was just completely stalled, and we were just kind of all waiting with bated breath, like, what is happening? what's going on with the lawsuit, because I thought it would just move really quickly. But as far as I know from my lawyers, we are still waiting for an answer. They have filed an appeal to the attempt to change the law. And I just know about those two Jewish organizations who filed those amicus briefs to support my case, which I think really says a lot as well. And so now we're waiting for a response from Georgia. And my lawyers are excellent. They're very on top of it, and they are planning to appeal anything that tries to subvert justice in this case. And so I will definitely keep you guys posted as soon as we know more. But right now it's kind of a waiting game.
Well, I hope it continues to move in a positive direction and in your favor, as it should. A follow-up is what type of organizations do you work with in cases like these? Like, I know there's Palestine Legal, ACLU. Are there other organizations, or are those the main ones that run the advocacy around this? And then the follow-up to that is like, how does someone pay for this? Or is it through paid later, or just, so like what kind of costs come along with something like this?
Well, that's what's amazing about this case is CARE is doing this pro bono. Because I wouldn't be able to, that's why I didn't even think to hire lawyers like when this all happened, because I just thought, well, I don't have the money for a big law firm to represent me. And I just didn't even think of it. And I kind of timidly asked them when they reached out to me, I was like, is this going to be, how much is this going to be? And CARE just said, no, we're doing this pro bono. And that just shows you kind of the integrity of an organization like CARE. And I think CARE, ACLU, they have been the two premier organizations on the forefront of fighting these anti-BDS laws across the country. Of course, Palestine Legal is an excellent advocacy organization as well that I encourage people to support. But CARE and ACLU, specifically CARE, because of their their narrow wean in on this issue in particular, where ACLU covers a lot more, and I think they're just a much bigger organization. So I encourage people to specifically, if you want to support these efforts, definitely think about supporting CARE as well, because the fact that they do this work pro bono, I think is a really incredible thing, because they simply just care about justice in this case, and they care about preserving the First Amendment, and they're not trying to actually make money. And in fact, they weren't even trying to make or win a settlement in terms of a financial settlement for this case. They just want to change the law, and we're not trying to get anything out of it other than the judge doing the right thing here, which is putting our Constitution back the way it should be, and not having these weird loyalty pledges, forcing Americans to sign them over to another country. And it is really interesting too, like if you just replace the word Israel with like Russia, like if you were to sign a contract that said you cannot have or ever will boycott the state of Russia, can you imagine the uproar in American society? And then if you had Putin's Ministry of Strategic Affairs tweeting like the next day being like, we've worked really hard to pass all these laws in the US, and like, we will threaten you if you like don't, it's like, what? Like, can you imagine the reaction? So it's just so beyond the pale and so cartoonish if you actually take Israel out of the equation and put literally any entity in its place. And another thing I want to bring up to people is like, you can boycott the state of Georgia. You can boycott the United States. There's no laws in place saying you can't do that if you want to work. So why is it that a foreign country has imposed itself like this across these states? It is a quite bizarre and surreal development.
Yeah, I find it super interesting that if anyone else, anywhere else, it wouldn't be as widely accepted. And if any other person was targeted by a different government entity single-handedly, it just wouldn't be acceptable. But there's, a list of double standards that we give Israel that is unending. We have a fellow board member, Kathleen, that is asking, the press alleges that Hamas is a terrorist organization that wants to become more powerful, so is bombarding Israel, and that Hamas says Israel should be destroyed. Please provide a more balanced view of Hamas.
Absolutely. Hamas was essentially, won a democratic election after Israel withdrew its forces from the Gaza Strip back in 2005 or so. This was after they were brutally occupying them, similarly to how they occupied the West Bank. I mean, since 1967, they took over the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and Hamas was kind of the only legitimate armed resistance faction that was fighting Israeli forces, fighting this kind of dehumanizing subjugation that they were experiencing, military checkpoints, brutal military law. And so there was quite a prestige for Hamas, when they forced Israeli soldiers and settlers out of Gaza. You kind of understand why they won the election the next year. The co-founder of Hamas at the time, when they won the election in 2006, he said, we do not engage in terrorism, we engage in resistance. And that is resistance by any means, including guns. And that is going to continue as long as we are occupied by this colonial entity. He explained it quite clearly. Hamas explicitly says that they are not a terrorist organization. They are simply resisting their colonial occupation. They live in a besieged open air prison where everything is controlled by the state of Israel. They live in subhuman conditions where even, the UN declared that by 2020 it would be uninhabitable for any human being. Now we're in 2021. It's quite astounding that the world sits idly by and lets Israel dehumanize Gazans living in the Gaza Strip by saying that they can just be bombed relentlessly because they elected Hamas. It would be like Americans' fair game to be carpet bombed because of Trump. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd. And they paint Hamas as this cartoonish authoritarian dictatorship where they actually cite in their charter that Jews shouldn't exist and they want to wipe Jews off the map. That is completely false. Their charter states it's Israel, it's the colonial occupiers who have conflated Judaism with Zionism. They denounce that. They say our fight is not against the Jewish people. They actually have the same stance that a lot of progressive Jewish organizations have around the world. If you actually look at what they say in the charter, they also say, like I mentioned before, that they are willing to accept a two-state solution among the 1967 borders. Quite a reasonable stance for an organization like Hamas, if I don't say so myself. But of course, you'll never hear this in the US media, and you'll never hear that Hamas doesn't reign supreme over the Gaza Strip, and it's not this, it doesn't control every aspect of society. There's a mosaic of political parties there. There's a mosaic of political beliefs. There's groups that are actually more conservative than Hamas. You have the Islamic Jihad in the region. There's groups that are communist, the PFLP. There's still Fatah members there. It's definitely more complex than is painted. If you look at WikiLeaks cables, the Israeli military chief actually said that they wanted Hamas to take control of the Strip because they wanted to have an excuse from that point forward to be able to regard Gaza as a hostile entity. Because once Hamas won, they could just wipe their hands clean and say every man, woman, and child living in Gaza is a hostile entity and therefore fair game to be bombed. And that's the exact excuse they've used ever since. And they've dehumanized these people to the point where people actually believe around the world that Hamas wants to kill its own people, that Palestinians are so subhuman that they like when their children die. I'm quoting Netanyahu here, who said they want to pile up dead bodies that are telegenically dead for their cause. What vile, atrocious language to actually say that people are that barbaric that they want their kids to die. Can you imagine that people believe this garbage? Hamas not only had this prestige from kicking Israeli soldiers out, but they also supplied a lot of things for the material conditions of Palestinians' lives in the area. I mean, Hamas is the government. Hamas is the government, whether that be transportation, whether it be infrastructure projects. I mean, that is who is the government. So whenever Israel carpet bombs a neighborhood and blames it on, oh, there's a Hamas member there, that could be someone who's a construction worker, who's a bus driver, who's a reporter, who's a police officer. And they carpet bomb the neighborhood and blow up the entire residential building where a Hamas member may be there or may be nearby and kill their entire families while they're sleeping. That's insane. That's a war crime. And they're doing this in broad daylight. And the fact that the media has the audacity to go and run cover for these war crimes and say, oh, well, it's Hamas. Oh, well, Hamas is a terrorist organization. No, that's actually not true. Hamas is the elected government in Gaza. And unless you understand the context of how they got elected and what they do, it's, the propaganda is just so disgusting and sickening. So it's a much more complicated scenario. And I just hope that people dig a little deeper here, because even if it were true, let's say, even if it were true, which of course it is not, that Hamas uses people as human shields, that's stupid. That's stupid. And if it were true, they would be able to provide video evidence for this, but of course they can't. But even if it were true, it's still a war crime to target civilians. They literally are targeting residential towers where they know people are sleeping inside, children, families. That's a war crime. It doesn't matter if there's a Hamas member there. It doesn't matter if you want to say that they're using a human shield. It's still a war crime. So any way you look at it, it makes no sense logically. It makes no sense logically.
Thank you for that powerful clarification and response with that. We have Sylvia is making a statement of there has been possibly bad news in the Arkansas Times case. Arkansas petitioned the entire 8th Circuit to rehear the case. Most of the judges are Trump appointees. The decision could be overturned, then will probably go to the Supreme Court. Do you have any comments or ideas of how that would turn out if that happened?
That's really good to know. Maybe Arkansas was the state that I was thinking of, that it wasn't a clear-cut case, but that is very bad news, but also it could be good news eventually, because if this does go to the Supreme Court, because you have different rulings in different states, which actually could be a good thing. Because if it were just every judge knocking down the law, then it would really, it's going to take a long time, 30 or so states, while more states are hearing these and more municipalities are passing anti-BDS measures. It would really require people in all of those states and municipalities to go challenge these laws. And the judge would knock them down and so on and so forth. But if there are different rulings for different states, like in the case of potentially Georgia and Arkansas, that could be an opening to go to the Supreme Court. And that is actually a very, very good thing, because I do think that the highest court in the land, as much as it's stacked with Trump people as well, I do think that it would be significant. I think that they would have no choice but to rule on the right side here, and it would gain an enormous amount of press. It wouldn't be able to be ignored, and there would be, I think, huge pressure campaigns mounted to draw attention to this issue. So that could actually be the best possible outcome here, is actually taking this up through the circuit courts to the Supreme Court. And I really do hope that happens.
Thank you. We have another question from Diane, or I meant another question, and this one is from Diane. How is the U.S. other parts of the world responding to your invitation to BDS?
I think that we're seeing monumental seismic shifts across the world. Like I mentioned before, there's trade unionists across Ireland, the UK, that have already pledged unequivocal support for BDS. You have huge solidarity actions going on across Europe, across the Middle East, across Africa. People living in certain countries, let's say in the Middle East and Africa specifically, that are kind of used to living under the boot of colonialism, they immediately get the struggle. They immediately have stood in solidarity with the Palestinian cause and against US oppression and colonization. And so they have been leading the charge. I would say Europeans have been second in line. Of course, Americans are always last in line. I think it's due to the heavily propagandized media machine, this notion that we have from birth that Israel is just a fundamental extension of the US government somehow. Like I said, this is changing now. There is an alarming trend, however. France and Germany, of course, Germany continues to exploit and project its own guilt from the Holocaust, and continues to punish innocent children in Palestine for its own collective guilt for the rise of Nazism. And it's really sad, because Germany has very, very harsh laws essentially prohibiting BDS in the country. And I know several German people who are just very disturbed by the fact that their government literally restricts this kind of activity and this kind of protest. Meanwhile, its neighbor France also just restricted pro-Palestine demonstrations and solidarity actions. So there are very alarming trends going on in some European countries that don't understand that, how crucial this is. And that really needs to change, but it needs to come from the citizens within those countries. And even though Germany aids and abets Israel with weapons and some form of aid, it really does come back to the US. And that is why the BDS movement is so crucial here in the US empire, in the heart, the belly of the beast, to actually stop this subsidization of this colonial apartheid project. Because, all of the countries around the world can band together, but as long as the US continues to shroud Israel with impunity and provide cover at the UN, it's going to be a long road ahead. And I do want to say one more thing, is that the International Criminal Court announcing that it's going to pursue war crimes in the occupied territories is a huge, huge thing. It's a huge thing. And then you have Human Rights Watch, an organization that's kind of notorious for both siding and obfuscating the issue, coming forward with their extensive 2-year investigation, conclusively determining that Israel's an apartheid state. When I say the dam has broken, I do mean that. And I do think that we are at a point of no return. And when you have organizations that are kind of liberal organizations like this coming forward with such charges, there is no looking back. There is no turning back. And it really is, every time Israel does something that is flagrantly violating international law, like they are right now, the consciousness is on fire. People are ready. And that is why it is up to us, all of you and everyone that knows the truth. Now is the moment. Now is the moment to spread this information and to wake people up. And every time that happens, think about how many millions of people, it's just a fire that just spreads, and you can't put that back. You can't put that back. And they know it's coming. They know it's coming. So I have faith. And I am extremely optimistic that we are going to see the fall of apartheid in the near future.
I sure hope so. We have a question from Ruben Shlomiansky. He's saying we need to have somebody whose business is affected by the anti-BDS law here because of concerns about retaliation or losing their business or being drawn into a lawsuit that could even bring legal penalties to them. Do you have any suggestions about how to deal with this? How can we move forward with a lawsuit when even talking about it openly is a risk for them?
That's a really good point, especially with people who, it's very economically uncertain in this country. I totally feel that, and I hear that. And that is why the mass consciousness and awareness is so important, because so many thousands of people are being pulled into this dragnet of these contracts that someone like me, someone who can take the risk, someone who can forfeit the work, right? That's who we need to catch. Because people who have everything to lose, of course they can't resist this. Of course they can't stand up and put their lives and their business and their family in danger like that, or risk losing financial security. So we have to open this up. We have to get this information out to as many people as that we can. So then someone will say, oh yeah, like I might be given a contract. I might have an opportunity to work here, and be aware of it. Be aware of it, because a lot of these people are signing these contracts not even knowing what's in them. A lot of people just sign away contracts and don't look at the language of them. So if you live in any one of these states and you're in a position like me, where you're going and getting contracted to do a job, I implore you and I encourage you, please find out if these anti-BDS laws apply. And spread the word, because that's what we need. And I think that thousands of people will have the ability to do that, but it just is that they don't even know. They have no idea. But yeah, anyone who's at risk, of course, that we shouldn't put anyone at risk, or anyone who might lose their financial security to do this. We have to have people who can take the risk. And I think that it just comes back to them knowing what's going on.
Thank you. Yeah, here in Minnesota, it's specific, where the law is so vague and also slightly specific, that's been really hard to find even a way to get it to have a plaintiff. And so
Mhm.
that's what's been the struggle in Minnesota, is they put it forward, I think, so that it would be hard to not only use on either side, so battle it or use it. So
Right.
it makes it really hard to repeal it. I guess my last question would be, I don't know if this is the same, but do you have any idea or seen any experience of people challenging things like Canary Mission? Because that's something that's targeting people like me and students, and that prevents us from getting jobs, going to Palestine, a lot of different things. And so I was just wondering if there's any legal stuff to like counter what's happening, because that is so invasive. Like it's extremely invasive, and it's volatile, and it's a hate page.
I totally empathize with that, and my heart goes out to people who are demonized, slandered. We understand how extensive the propaganda apparatus is. We understand how desperate they are to slander and demonize Palestinian activists. I mean, this is really what at the core of the efforts is, and this is why, of course, BDS is being criminalized. People who are just simply student organizers. I mean, we saw through the Israel lobby, that Al Jazeera documentary, they are going and infiltrating student group organizations, demonizing these people as anti-Semites, trying to expose them. It is horrific what is going on, trying to basically prevent them from having a career for the rest of their lives, because they're doing these things campus to campus, putting so much effort. Things like Canary Mission are absolutely horrific. It makes people lose their jobs. It doxes people. And I don't know the recourse. I don't know the legal recourse to this. And I do know several people who've been affected who feel like they can't put their face out there anymore because of fear of retaliation. And that is absolutely atrocious. And I just commend the bravery of people for doing this type of work, knowing the retaliation that can come from this state. But I wish that I had a better answer. I wish that there was something being done, and maybe there is, that I'm not aware of trying to fight this on a legal basis. It is a really, really sad thing, this Canary Mission thing, because I know a lot of people who've been affected by it, and it's awful.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for everything that's been said. It's all been extremely powerful, and it's absolutely necessary. I will be handing this over to our president now, Janet Toland.
All right, I am back. Abby, that was amazing. And your passion for this is inspiring, absolutely inspiring. And we all need to get angry like this. We all need to be angrier. Anger is always a good thing when you funnel it to do good things. And you're doing that. So thank you. I also would like to echo that echo your hopefulness that the needle has changed. I think we need to hear that as well, that all these years of our forums and other people combating this injustice will not be for nothing, if I can use a double negative. So thank you so much for that. Next month's forum will take place on Saturday, June 12th, via Zoom, of course, featuring Malka Bird, who is a member of the National Jewish Voice for Peace, and she will address the issues of anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism. Abby, you referred to that. That is a hot topic. It's a difficult one for people to sort out, and so we've had requests for that kind of presentation. So we're looking forward to that. We've also listed 2 more upcoming May events in our chat. The May 24th event that Virgil highlighted, very important one about democracy, about BDS. And also on May 19th, the Minnesota Alliance for Peace is hosting a webinar entitled, "What is Happening to Our Democracy? What Can We Do?" This webinar features our Attorney General, Keith Ellison, among other speakers. This will be a very important and excellent event for all of us. So please keep that in mind and register for those two events. Both of these events are in our chat and will be included in a follow-up email to you all. Please, please, please take the 5 minutes to complete our evaluation. We need more input from all of you. We do appreciate your input and take it seriously. And finally, if you like what you see and hear and are not yet a member of Middle East Peace Now, please consider doing so. Our dues are very, very reasonable. A link to our membership registration is also in the chat. Have I forgotten anything, panelists?
I just want to make sure that everyone knows, who's in Minnesota at least, that there is an action march today organized by American Muslims for Palestine, Minnesota, and Anti-War Committee for the ongoing Nakba and what is happening in Palestine now. So we'd love for everyone to show up. It's at the restaurant Filfila in Columbia Heights, Minnesota, at 2 p.m. It was originally a car caravan and now it is a rally. So we'd love to see every one of you there. And the Facebook event is in the chat.
Thank you, Maya. And Maya, thank you for moderating the Q&A as well. You always do such a good job with that. This ends our forum. Again, our thanks to you, Abby, and please enjoy the day, all of you. Bye-bye.
Free Palestine. Thanks so much, guys.